What's up? So check this out. I'm going to start this one off with a little rule of thumb. And if you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. Don't let yourself become attached to anything that you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner. Heat. Let's talk about this movie. Heat. This movie. Listen to what I'm about to tell you right now. If you have not seen this movie, I implore you, before I say anything about it, I implore you, please watch this movie. You will not be disappointed. It is a masterpiece in filmmaking. It is a masterpiece in great writing. It's a masterpiece in great acting, cinematography, music. It is a tour de force of an offering from Michael Mann. Now, if you don't know the backstory of this movie, I'll tell you a little bit. So there's something to be said for a second shot, a retry, if you will. There are directors out there who've made their movies, made a version of their movies, and have remade them or expanded them. You look at something like Thunder Road, for instance. That was a short film, and then it was remade as a feature film. You can make a case for Robert Rodriguez's El Mariachi, which is an amazing film if you haven't seen that. That's a fantastic independent film. Now, technically, it wasn't remade. But if you look at Desperado, which is the follow-up to that film of the Mexico trilogy, you could argue that it's kind of like a remake. Or at least there's a section of it that has, sort of like a flashback or whatever. So that he remade Desperado is like a second try to make a more polished, more punchy version of El Mariachi. And with the case for Heat, Michael Mann originally, if you don't know, there's a great documentary on YouTube about this, where Michael Mann approached this film. It was going to be a pilot for a show that was never picked up, and ended up being a made-for-TV movie called L.A. Takedown. Same story, same characters, but obviously, it was made. It came out in I think 88, 89, and that's what it was. You got. That's what you got. Heat is the second attempt at bringing this story to life, and it was so successful. I still think it's so successful that it spawned. So you may know in the last couple of years, Michael Mann actually has revisited this story, the world of these characters in this film. There was a book I think that came out, like a sequel book that continues the story, whatever, after this film. And I think, I could be wrong, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if there's going to be another movie, there's going to be something else happening that grows out of this movie. That's how serious this is. Off the top, it's already ridiculous. And most of all, because it is the first time you see Al Pacino, Robert De Niro in a film together. In a scene together. 2 Oscar winners. Heavy hitters. Why haven't they worked together before? I don't know. But this project brings them together. And if there was ever only one project for that, this is the project for that. I know there was another film they did some years later. I can't remember the name of it, but they were, obviously, I want to say in the early aughts, so 2000, 8 or 9, something like that. Somewhere in the mid 2000s-ish, late 2000s, that they made. I don't think any other pairing between them is as strong or will ever be as strong. And then of course The Irishman. They were in a film together. 2019's The Irishman. If you're asking me, I don't care what other film they do. Heat will always be the pinnacle of their pairings. So this film, my understanding, is based on real people, a true story. Deals with a cop who is obsessed trying to catch a career criminal, Neil McCauley. as he takes down scores. The cop in this film, Lieutenant Vincent Hanna, he's intense. He's intense. This guy is like he lives and breathes his work at the expense of his home life, the expense of his marriage, expense of his sanity. You can see the work is kind of drives him crazy a little bit, but that's what he needs. He needs that energy to do his job. And then you compare him against someone like Neo, who's got scruples. He's a criminal, but there's a code he follows, and he's very good. He's also very good at what he does. And you put these two guys together in a sandbox, and just watch the electricity play out. It's so good that there's stuff that happens separately before you even see them on screen together, and that just goes to show how strong the writing is. Because really, even when they're not on screen, when we're not seeing them, you have characters like Val Kilmer, Tom Sizemore, guys who are a part of the mix that are equally compelling and do their jobs in terms of fulfilling the roles that they play in the story. And they add much needed life to the proceedings. I don't know that. I think the film still would be great without them. You just add them because there's adds more richness to the story. What's cool about this film, what I love about this film, there's a few things. There's a lot to say about this film. A lot I love about it. But I'll just list things and go down the list. So the first thing I recognized, I hadn't seen it in a while, so I watched it recently, a couple days ago. And I think one of the things that I think struck me was, one, you can make a case that this film is really about Neil. This is Neil McCauley's journey. He's on a mission. He's going to take down a score, probably his last big one for a while, before he goes off and maybe retires and does whatever he wants to do. This is a story about him coming out of the big house, connecting with his family. And the family piece is another thing I think that's important that I thought was really cool. Where you look at Neil, who's essentially he's like the villain, but you see him hanging out. There's scenes where you see him hanging out with his team, his crew, who are all are family men. They have partners, and some of them have children as well. And you get to see them sort of interacting like a unit. They're really in it. In fact, the first sort of score we see in the film, you get a sense of how tight the guys are and how well they work together, and how much work Neil does to sort of as the sort of leader, keeping them together, without even saying a whole lot. You can tell these men respect him. They operate by a similar code. They share similar values, and that's the team. That's what you got going on. Along the way, Neil meets a woman, and this you can feel how this could potentially complicate what he's got going on. You imagine a scenario where this woman becomes incorporated into his family, and maybe they all get to hang out one day at dinner, whatever it is. That's sort of in your headcanon, you can imagine that. So I think the family piece there is important. And the film actually really does a good job at not only giving us a clearly defined presentation of who Neil is, but what he stands for, what he cares about, and the people around him, and how he actually, he cares about them too, and it's cool to see that he's not just a villain who's just evil, but he's a guy who is good at doing sort of activities that are bad, but he's not trying to kill people. Like he's trying to take down a score. And trying to do it in a way that is efficient, that ideally doesn't result in any loss of life, and get in, do the job, get out of there. That's what he's about. What he didn't count on in this story is running up against Hannah, who, on the flip side, you have Vincent Hanna, who is the accomplished lieutenant, who also has a team. You see his home life is sort of not stable. He's having some problems with his wife, but he's got a stepdaughter who you can see he clearly cares about, and who she also cares about him. You can see there's a genuine sort of care there. But you also it's obvious that Hannah's work is more important, and that's what we have going on. You don't see too much of the family element with his detectives that he works with, but you see them enough to know, hey, they're working closely on this situation. But it's clear that Hannah he's about this job. That's sort of where he lives. Really, Hannah and Neil are the same. They're just operating on different sides of the conversation, really. And this movie is a conversation. Make no mistake that all the moves that are made, it's a chess match that they're playing, but there's definitely a conversation being had. And speaking of conversations, that leads me to the next thing that I love about this movie. So you can make a case so that this film has two centerpieces, I think. Most people will tell you the centerpiece of this film is the downtown shootout, which I'm going to get to that. That's an amazing sequence. We're going to get to that, which is probably the centerpiece action sequence of the film. But the other centerpiece that precedes it is, hands down, probably the conversation between the two of them over coffee. And this is the other thing I love about when movies do this. How a conversation between two people, and when handled by actors who can elevate the words on a page, or in some cases, just take beats from that page, not even script lines, and maybe ad-lib, the beats they're supposed to hit. And if they can ad-lib it and make it sound authentic and make it sound rich and real and compelling and electric, that's even better. Those scenes that are just talking can be equally exciting and can be just as strong, just as exhilarating and punchy as any action sequence. And I think this scene is a great example of that. And they're just two guys talking. But it's how they're talking that makes it that much more serious. How these two guys deliver the material. Even before I started shooting this video, so I watched that scene again like 3 times. It's so good. It's just so good. So well written and just well played. And you can watch this scene too, compare it to the LA Takedown version, the original version of this movie. And it's fine. The LA Takedown version of the scene is fine. And I'm not saying it just because it's Pacino and DeNiro. Something about how they portray it it's a dessert. It's such a treat. Oh, so good. I just love it so much. I think they do a good job just having a conversation. And I think what's funny about this, what I found this time watching it through, that from a character standpoint, this is the only time in the movie where Hannah and Neil can just be, aside from when they're with their people, like their families or whatever it is, this is the only time where they really get to open up in a way that doesn't require them to have a little bit of their guard is completely down with each other. It's the only time that you really see that. They're talking about their personal lives to each other. They're talking about their dreams, or nightmares. They're talking about what they think about stuff and their philosophies. They're having a conversation like just two people. And it's the most civilized thing. And at the same time, it's the most honest. It's the most truthful situation. And that's what makes it that much more beautiful. You could also argue that this is really a story about two men recognizing they're equal in each other. It's beautiful like that. It's a kind of weird love story in that way, and I don't mean it like, I mean, you can take it for what you will, but there is an element of there's a love story in it that's not conventional. It's not how we're taught to believe love stories are supposed to be. These two guys have a mutual respect for each other. And it's a lot like when you meet somebody who you're really vibing with and you're like, oh, this person really matches me. They're a match. The coffee scene is you've seen that in different versions leading up to that, how one person is sort of getting the better of the other person without them knowing who the other person is just yet. And when they finally meet, that's where you see that this is, oh, I got it. They're feeling each other out, and they're seeing like, oh, I see you, you see me, and everything. They put all their cards on the table. No pretense now. The thing that's cool about that conversation is that once it happens, now the kid gloves are off. For real. And the game is on. For reals. It's a thrill. It sets you up for the latter half of the movie. And what a big way to set you up, because almost immediately following that, the main score takes place. And then you have the downtown LA shootout, which is a fantastic action sequence. It's so loud, right? The sound design, the sound mixing is pitch perfect. You feel like you're in the middle of a shootout. You almost have to go like this, because that's how serious it is. And I was watching it, like, not only is it's shot so well, the way the camera captures the action, logistically, you see where everything is. The build up to it is already serious, right? Like when the cops arrive on the scene and they're running up to see, hey, they're just completed the job. They were out. They successfully robbed the bank. They were out. They were scot-free. And Hannah and his team get there right as they're leaving. Boom, shootout takes place. It's an expert example in how to build tension, and the execution of it is just masterful. You know they had to really rehearse to get the situation set up right. The blocking, it's fantastic. It's probably one of the best shootout sequences probably ever. I can't think of a better one. I can't think of anyone that comes close to it. The film Last Man Standing, the Bruce Willis film, has a series of great shootouts. That movie is full of really strong shootouts. But I don't even think that movie comes close to this one sequence in Heat. No way. The Matrix has a great shootout in the first Matrix. That when they go to rescue Morpheus, that's a thrilling shootout. Doesn't come close to Heat. It's also the most realistic. It's so serious, like the angles of the camera, how they really catch the full on, how the guys are shooting and stuff, and how the actors, they trained. I know they trained to get it right, to get how to reload. Like you believe them. They sold how to move with the weapons cleanly, how to reload the magazines, how to cover from fire, everything is such, it feels so like they were just locked in, and it paid off. Whatever happened behind the scenes to make that sequence work, it paid off majorly, because it's a fantastic sequence, and even down to the culmination is clean, which reminds me of The Untouchables. Also has great shootouts, right? The Untouchables movie, when Elliot Ness and his boy, played by Andy Garcia, when they're about to, the baby carriage is moving down. That's fantastic. I have to review that movie too. I'm going to talk about the movie, but I bring up that sequence at the end of the shootout, that when the baby carriage situation in Untouchables, because that's where it ends, and I think it reminds me that it's like the end of the shootout here in Heat, where Hannah comes across Slick, who's grabbed this girl, and he's about to, hand is ready to shoot that guy. And again, very well executed, very well edited, very well executed. Just fantastic. The culmination of the shootout, well done. Chef's kiss. It's fantastic. I mentioned earlier at the start of this, earlier in this video, that this is a Neil McCauley story. And Hannah is almost like the opposition. Hannah gets in the way. It's a lot like Infinity War. You know how Infinity War is, it really feels like a Thanos story. Thanos on a quest to retrieve the Infinity Stones. And the heroes are like the antagonists. They're obstacles in his way. You know what I mean? This movie could have easily been been a situation where Neil gets away. And he got away. He actually won. Neil won this. If he wasn't so prideful, he would have gotten away with it scot-free. He won the match. So it's essentially, it's Infinity War, but the film ends a little bit differently. But I would argue too that in the way that this film ends, you could argue too that there's something beautiful about how it ends. The climax of the film is really where that Heat quote comes into play in the most clear way. The idea that you can't be attached to anything that you're not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds if you see the heat. And the climax, it calls that into question directly, and you get to see what Neil has to do. He has to make a decision whether or not he's about to go right off in the sunset with the homegirl or get out of the kitchen because the heat is coming. It's probably one of the most thrilling climaxes in ever. I mean, there's a lot of good climaxes now. Don't get me wrong, but this one, the way it plays out, and the last shot, the final shot of the film before it cuts to black, for the credits hit. There's a beauty in that, and there's kind of a it's kind of sad too. Like there's something sad about it. There's something there's something poetic about it. Neil and Hannah, that's in my headcanon, that dynamic is probably going to shape how Hannah thinks about his job. And he's probably thinking he'll never find anybody on Neil's level. Like that was his true equal. It's like Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty. That's Batman and Joker. Like that's it. There's no one. I don't care how many villains you have, any of the guys you got to come up against. Nobody's going to be that. That because that person really is just it's you. Like Neil and Hannah, they're brothers. They're on the same wavelength. So, and I think the last shot solidifies that. It shows us that. Like, and there, it's something like, yo, man, hey, this is, it's like, you, Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, one of the greatest rivalries in sports history, where they're bitter rivals, but they were great. There's a great friendship there, and you can see there's a mutual respect for each other's skill. And I always love seeing stories that come up across between the two of them, because in a lot of ways, that's what this movie is. The Heat is the story of a Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, and they're both top A-stars of what they do. And then it's just about, hey, who's gonna win? It's not about who's better, because they're equal. It's just that who's gonna win. That's by the end of it, when the clock strikes 12, who's gonna win? Who's when everything runs out, who's gonna be on top? That's what we got going on. That's what this film is. And yeah, man, Heat is great. So I urge you, if you haven't seen it in a while, pick it up, watch it again, because it's a good film. In fact, I might watch it again. This movie, 10 out of 10, recommend, as my sister says. Check this movie out. It's fantastic. And if it's not your cup of tea, that's okay too. I happen to think this movie is amazing. Give it a shot. You won't be disappointed. So I'm out of here. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with another review later. In the meantime, see ya.